Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Stimson Center, and we're just going to give it half a minute for more people to log into the webinar, and then we will get started. All right, I think we have a critical mass, so let's get going. Welcome again. I'm Pam Kennedy, a research fellow at Stimson and deputy director of the China East Asia program. And today we're going to discuss the economic security challenges of AI, and in particular, how Taiwan and the United States are thinking about and responding to it. As we all know, AI is developing very rapidly as a technology, and we're still in, I would say, the early stages of experimenting with its applications. And in terms of economic security, this really presents an unusual confluence of opportunities and challenges that really is in many ways an inflection point. So there are a lot of questions that will be answered one way or another over the coming months and years, like how to build resilient supply chains and resources that support AI research and usage, how to integrate AI into various industries and sectors of the economy and ultimately into our societies, such that people are protected and that the technology is productive. And the United States, of course, as the center of AI innovation, and Taiwan as the source of the most advanced semiconductors that make AI possible, are really well positioned to impact the near future of AI. Taiwan recently passed a new law on AI in January, and the US has an AI initiative driven by the White House. But for today's discussion, since these are very complex issues, I'm really delighted to have three top experts joining me to shed light on various aspects of AI and US-Taiwan cooperation. First, Christy Xu is the director of the Taiwan ASEAN Study Center at the Tsinghua Institution for Economic Research in Taipei, and she's an expert on these issues of economic integration and supply chains. Minyan Zhang is the Deputy Director of the Economic Security Program at the Research Institute for Democracy, Society, and Emerging Technology, also in Taipei. He studies semiconductors and geopolitics, as well as the economic security angle. And Julia Neer is a research analyst in the Strategic Foresight Hub here at Stimson. She's an expert on responsible AI and AI governance, and she's leading several projects that track AI policy and its social political impacts. So thank you so much for joining me. To start us off, Christy, what does the AI revolution look like from Taiwan's perspective? Like, what are the main economic security challenges that Taiwan is really concerned about?
Now, first of all, I want to thank Stimson Center for having me here, and thank you very much, Pamela, for this question. From a Taiwan perspective, the development and adoption of the artificial intelligence is reshaping Taiwan's social economic structure. On the social dimension, I would like to talk it in a broader aspect. Taiwan has entered a super age society and face a persistent labor shortage. Taiwan currently has a median age of 44 to 45 years old, among the highest in the world, about 6 to 7 years older than the US, and about 20 years older than the Philippines. And therefore, the adoption of AI has provided important substitute labor across multiple sectors, including services, manufacturing, automation, smart logistics, custom services, and AI assistant healthcare. In this area, AI helps alleviate workforce constraint and improve efficiency, just as it is in other countries. However, AI is also contributing to a widening gap in income and opportunities and reinforce structural inequality within Taiwan society. The economic dimension, as you asked, the current wave of AI development has significantly boosted Taiwan's economic growth and exports and private investors in Taiwan, investments in Taiwan and abroad. Last year, in 2025, Taiwan's GDP expanded by 8.6%, a rate never been seen in 15 years, and the export value grew by more than 30%. These were largely driven by exports of AI chips, AI servers, data centers, and also supply chain investment in Taiwan. Taiwan companies such as TSMC, Delta probably not known to anyone, but it's the leader of cooling technology in AI, in data center, and Foxconn. They are key players in AI supply chains. TSMC, for example, produced more than 90% of the most advanced AI chips. Foxconn, or in Chinese, Honghai, is the world's largest electronics contract manufacturer. The company alone is reported to have nearly 40% of AI server market share globally. However, the growth also comes with a structural concern, as also as Taiwan's economic momentum is becoming increasingly concentrated in semiconductor and AI-related industry. While this enhances Taiwan's strategic importance, it also increases the risk of overdependence on a single sector. For example, AI semiconductors actually accounted for around 60% to 70% of our total export. And these benefits of AI are not evenly distributed. The gains are heavily concentrated among large technology companies and their high-skilled professionals, while traditional sectors, including auto parts, bicycles, textile, and steel, and also small and medium-sized companies face greater pressure and may lose out in international market. And furthermore, AI-related industry, especially semiconductor manufacturing and data infrastructure, are highly resource-intensive, including electricity and water. And this constraint, because Taiwan is a small island with very limited natural resources, so these constraints could become bottlenecks for future growth. And this is exactly the reason that in order to alleviate potential electricity shortage in Taiwan, the current ruling party, DPP, the government, which has long been known as opposed nuclear power, is currently assessing the technical feasibility of restarting operations of two nuclear power plants in Taiwan, nuclear power plant number 2 and power plant number 3. And also there is the issue of geopolitical risk, but I'll just leave this to Mignon later, and I'll just stop here and waiting for more exchange later during the interaction session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Christy. It is really interesting to see how much impact AI has on Taiwan society in different ways. The huge impact on the economy, of course, and how it is really it's underlined by a much weaker economy in various sectors, but AI is such a driving force for the high-tech industries. But as you say, also AI has a lot of potential to potentially help Taiwan as an aging society. So there are ways to envision it being the gains distributed more evenly, and ways to figure out how to apply it productively. I want to ask Mignon next, on those geopolitical issues, how does geopolitics intersect with the economic security issues in the realm of AI development and applications? And how do you see Taiwan and the US approaching these challenges?
Yeah, thank you, Pamela, and thank you for inviting me here. So I think basically in the playground of Taiwan's AI security or AI economic security, the two main players would be US and China. And first of all, I think if we define the AI, we can set it in at least 3 layers. The first is the software layers, so AI models, application standards. The second is hardware layers, semiconductor packages, after interconnects or computing infrastructures. And also the third is the application layer, like where AI is embodied in the real world systems, such as like industrial automations, edge computing, robotics. So there will be different layer of questions and solutions to answer the economic security related problem or questions. And I think in the previous years, or at least in the Biden administrations, like when we talk about geopolitics and economic security, we would have more discussion on like export control coordinations, investment review mechanisms. This issue is still important, but I think today I would like to use this 5 minutes to highlight, like in the Trump administration or Trump 2.0 roles, like the idea rejected in the AI action plan. I think the US side is put more emphasis on the AI export, or we could see it in the policy document, like US is trying to exploding the full stack AI packages. So to answer like the Taiwan's position, Taiwan's role in the so-called geopolitical or techno-geopolitical landscape, I think I could say like US and Taiwan, we are approaching the similar challenges, but from very different positions. And I would say the two countries is still continuously or increasingly approaching this challenge in a complementary way. So basically, US in the whole industrial supply chain, US adopt the important role in the software part, Taiwan on the hardware part. And I want to highlight like 3 new areas. Maybe people have little attention on it before, and as a DSET researchers, we have also published a new article in the NVR issue. So if you're interested, I can share the article with you. So like the 3 new area is like the first is the silicon photonics, the second is quantum technologies, the third is AI robotics. And these 3 areas, they all like highly related to the further AI technology development. And also it's also like regarded as the 3 of the 10 main targeted area in the policy plan of the Taiwanese government. We have a policy plan so-called the new 10 AI infrastructure plan. So like, for example, for the silicon photonics, we all know like the AI infrastructure, like AI data center require enormous energies, and the traditional electrical interconnect would generate heat and waste energy. So this new technology is used to move more data with much lower power loads by shifting from purely electronic signaling to the optical communications. And how to realize this technology integrated into the tiny chips, it needs the manufacturer from Taiwan, especially from TSMC, and also rest on those local ecosystem there. And also Taiwanese companies has already promoted the industrial airlines and R&D platforms and testing the infrastructure in these fields. And I would say if it's go to the successful, and it would also benefit the main customers from the US side. And for the quantum technologies, it shows different patterns, but it's also still kind of far from the mass commercializations. But at the current stage, there are many tech giants in the US, and also Taiwanese government is already put a lot of R&D resources into the capacity of these like talent or more long-term experimentations, and also trying to scale up when the industrial technology is mature. So the basic logic behind it is if quantum computing could be successful, it could eventually transform the AI or high performance computing into the other stage. and it would influence the efficiencies of the whole AI systems, computing systems. And also, I think Taiwan is playing a very important role because it would need the country or industrial systems like with the complete semiconductor cryogenic or like a system integration capabilities. And finally, I would say AI robotic will be the next important target, both US and Taiwan. And we all know that China is like chasing out behind US, especially on the hardware side. So for the US company is very good at designing the software ecosystem and the computing platform. Like we could use the metaphor, like US company is very good at designing the brand. But how to embody the brand or the intelligence, they also or they need Taiwan, or if they can integrate Taiwan's ecosystem into the so-called non-race supply chain, non-China supply chain, it will be a better opportunity for the two countries or more like-minded country to build up the AI robotic ecosystem. And Taiwanese company, they are very good at investing in the nervous system, the limbs, and the production systems that could allow the AI robotics to operate in the real world. So I will stop here, but we can have more discussion later. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Minyan. As you describe these, like the new frontiers where like the Taiwanese government with the 10 new AI initiatives has identified as key areas for like the next steps in developing AI and applying AI, what really comes to mind is the importance of having the talent supply chain as well, the engineers and the policy analysts. It's like everyone from working on the hardware and the software all the way up to figuring out ways to apply it and how to direct it is perhaps one of the most challenging parts of developing those new technologies. And we'll discuss more on the talents a little later. I wanted to turn next to Julia because the one element that we haven't really had a chance to touch on yet is like how responsible AI factors into the concept of AI as an economic security issue. This is an area where I think Taiwan has taken a few more strides than the US. And so I'm really curious to hear about Julia's thoughts on the key challenges for cooperating on the social impacts of AI.
Thanks, Pam. Thanks for having me. And thanks, Christy and Minyan, for your remarks. It was great to hear what you had to say. I study AI. I'm not a Taiwan expert, and so it's really interesting to hear your perspectives. On the responsible AI piece, I think that, Pam, you kind of alluded to this already, but I do think that responsible AI definitely has a role to play when it comes to economic security. I've talked about it before in the context of national security, and I think a similar principle is involved, wherein if you want people to use a technology and if you want that technology to have widespread adoption and to be successful, you need to build in trust for the users. And I think that the responsible AI discourse a lot of the time these days is focused on building trust with consumers and ensuring that people feel comfortable using AI and integrating it. And I think this can go, you can talk about the surface level or like the initial piece where it's, okay, I trust this technology not to reveal my personal data, or I trust this technology to function at a high level. It can also mean I trust that this technology is not impacting the environment in a way that doesn't align with my views. And I think there's so much discourse around AI right now on a global scale that many people have their own kind of perspectives on what they like or don't like about AI. We're seeing increasing pushback from people when it comes to labor markets. People are really worried about losing their jobs. And so I think in the context of economic security, responsible AI is really about building up trust with users that facilitates greater adoption. And this can, necessarily touch on a number of different issues within the space. So whether it's environment, whether it's trust, whether it's data, all of these different things come into play. Within global context, I think there's also, you have to anchor that within the context of geopolitical competition and also within the US's role when it comes to, as I think Minion mentioned, exporting the full AI stack and the US strategy towards international cooperation right now when on AI. I think that in response or in parallel to this push for exporting the full US AI stack, there's also been a push for sovereign AI coming out of a lot of countries, especially in the global majority. What that means is basically the idea that countries want to have their own homegrown AIs, or that they minimally want to control the data that is fed into the AI models that are used domestically. And so what that can mean is when you situate a data center in a certain country, the country may want to control how that data flows and how that personal data is managed. Or if that data is stored in the cloud, they may want it to follow their own domestic data laws and data privacy laws. And so I think all of these things come into play internationally as well in terms of building a trusted ecosystem for the US and for the way that the US interacts with its allies and partners on AI. On that, I just wanted to touch a little bit on how the US and Taiwan can kind of think about cooperation or collaboration on responsible AI. I think, Minion, you also mentioned the Trump versus Biden kind of approaches. I think under the Biden administration, the rhetoric around AI was a lot more focused on AI safety, on this building trust, on security. And even though functionally the AI policies were not that different in terms of the ways that the government was actually interfacing with Silicon Valley, the rhetoric around it was extremely different. And so now under the Trump administration, obviously we're seeing a pushback against focus on safety, on DEI, on words like equity and inclusion. All of these things have been really integral to responsible AI discussions. And so obviously there you have kind of a normative misalignment between countries that are focused still on ethics and on inclusion versus the US and countries that are kind of pulling away from that. And I think you mentioned we'll talk a little bit about Taiwan's approach via the new basic AI law, but I think that there are still ways to cooperate across borders, even when you do have this normative misalignment, because I think that the crux of the issue is really, for the US in particular, is really exporting that full AI stack and is really having adoption. And so I don't think that it's necessarily a core incompatibility for a country to be espousing equity or inclusion or safety when it comes to AI, so long as the actual policy as relates to the business environment and exports are aligned with US interests in that way. And, I don't want to project this all onto Taiwan or say that this is the way that it has to happen, but I do think that there are ways to work around normative misalignments when it comes to AI safety language on the global scale. So I'll pause there, but looking forward to continuing the conversation and talking more.
Thank you so much, Julia. That's a very interesting perspective, how that there can be, as you say, this normative misalignment and yet room for cooperation, especially since if the US does want other countries to use as much of the US AI technology stack as possible as the AI action plan states, then sort of getting other countries to agree and to adopt those technologies will mean that the US has to consider how they are also thinking about AI sovereignty and what their populations, what their people are thinking in terms of trusting AI. I think then we will turn next to Taiwan's new AI law, because that is, I think, an interesting model for other countries to consider. It's a starting place law that was passed in January. It's not very long, but it manages to set out in, I think, a very concise way, a good framework for thinking about how to implement AI without stifling innovation and not and guarding against sort of the ways AI could be used to harm people's lives, like job losses or so unexpected negative externalities. And of course, the issues that we've already seen, like with disinformation and other AI-enabled threats to democracies, of course. So I wanted to ask the group, particularly our Taiwanese experts, how do you see the new AI laws potentially being a starting point for deeper US-Taiwan collaboration? Minyan first, and then Christy.
Yeah, maybe I could put it very short. Also, I'm not a legal expert. I have to say that first. So I may not like interpret it very professionally from a legal perspective, but from the more like a security perspective or industrial perspective, we all know that the new AI basic law is kind of the framework that could guide the Taiwanese government or some related authorities or even some private sector to know what would be the guideline that when Taiwan proceeds to the next stage of AI development and what step or what items should be emphasized. And it's of course like integrate several like new principles or various important policy goal like primarily have mentioned into the current role. But the shortcoming would still be like because it is not yet very detailed. So when it comes to implementations, it will still people could still raise a lot of questions about what exactly what it means, and for industry, well, there was maybe ask what would be the concrete requirements that the government would say about or what in terms of international or US Taiwan corporations, what kind of items that we have to follow. But I think to proceed or to follow up like this the discussion on these new laws, I think we can put our discussions like field by field. For example, I would say like this information still like Taiwan, even though there's no AI, and it is also true that in the AI era, Taiwan, I think is still very like frontier facing the AI disinformation warfares and from the country like China or some others malicious sources. So Taiwan is always like I think it's a very important field, incremental field that people could know the very timely and immediate the social problem, the new emerging problem by these new emerging technologies and how the whole society responds to it, and to have to gather new data and to analyze and to do the research and to decide the new solutions. So I think like for US, Taiwan may be a, a field because it's relatively small and at a very like in the front of or in a very core area of the current geopolitical conflict. So we could always get a lot of lessons from Taiwan and to learn from it and support Taiwan to deal with these new challenges. And we could always have a new insight and new lessons and to formulate some new policy solutions to targeting these new challenges. Yeah, so I think for this AI new basic node, the next step is still there's still um, a lot of new steps like waiting for like international cooperation to fill it in. Yeah.
Thank you, Christy.
Yes, I would like to go back to the AI Basic Act. It already entered into force, as you mentioned, in February in February this year, and this Act takes inspiration from the EU's AI regulatory framework. So it's a bit different to the US approach, but in incorporating concepts, risk-based classification, transparency requirement, and also accountability. And therefore, Taiwan and US and probably other like-minded country like EU can enhance policy dialogue and to share insights and also experiences. And in addition to this law, there are also, as Mingyong just mentioned, there are a number of 5 years plan that focus more on improving Taiwan's AI's supercomputing capacity, building Taiwan's sovereign AI data set. We are also trying to build up our own sovereign AI data sets, and also to develop large-scale traditional Chinese, not simplified Chinese, but traditional Chinese language AI models in Taiwan, and also AI adoption. So for all these initiatives and programs, I believe there can be a lot of exchanges and also cooperation under the already existed Taiwan-US platform like the EPPD talks, because the EPPD talks already identify AI, semiconductor technology, and also critical mineral to be the targeted area for Taiwan-US collaboration. In addition to cooperation between Taiwan and US, I would say that there is huge potential for Taiwan US to cooperate this in third country that includes Southeast Asian countries, for example. And recently, we have studied Taiwan's companies are now winning large-scale contracts or investing heavily in some of the ASEAN Southeast Asian countries, including Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Vietnam, because these countries are eagerly developing their either data centers or sovereign AI or other digital infrastructure, where Taiwan is seen as a trusted supplier. However, you also know that China, under its soft silk Road Initiative, under the Belt and Road Initiative, are also heavily investing in these countries. Therefore, my understanding is most of these countries, they are not depending on one single source, but they try to rebalance and diversify their cooperation. So they can work with Taiwan, with a Chinese company, Alibaba, and also Transcend. But on the other hand, they are also very interested in further cooperations with Taiwan. So in this regard, I believe Taiwan, US, and also possibly other economies can work together to build up the so-called non-China supply chain, the non-China semiconductor, non-China AI supply chain in this area, where Taiwan and US can provide capital technology, especially the US can provide your platforms, and this and Southeast Asian country can provide the market and also all other things that we can work together.
Thank you so much. Julia, did you want to add thoughts as well?
No, I mean, the one thing that I would add on the law, I took a look at it, and with the law kind of comparing it to the EU AI Act, I could see that was part of the inspiration for the bill. And I thought that was a really interesting approach, but I think that the bill, it bridges a lot of different, or it touches on a lot of different approaches to AI policy, and that you've obviously got the EU approach, which maps out kind of a risk-based assessment for how we manage AI. So thinking about different levels of risks corresponding to different levels of regulation. At the same time, it's also a very high level piece of law that, as Minyan mentioned, it's very there is relatively little on the implementation and on exactly how this law will be executed. So I think, going back to what I said earlier, I think that leaves a lot of room for collaboration with other countries and figuring out ways to make the approach to these ethical or moral or normative goals one that is collaborative and one that works across ecosystems. And so I think it's a really interesting approach. I also particularly liked the mention of liability and insurance in it. I think that there's a lot of debate about where in the AI supply chain do you regulate AI when you're thinking about responsible AI. So do you do it within the model itself and say, I don't want my model to generate any harmful outputs ever? Or do you regulate it ex post and think about, okay, if the model has a harmful output, how do we approach that? Who's liable? How do we ensure that, any potential victims are compensated? And that's where kind of the liability and insurance piece comes in. And I think that approach is a lot more compatible with kind of a hands-off regulatory approach to AI, like the one that we see in the US, where there is relatively little appetite to dictate what exactly a model should do or get really involved, really upstream in the supply chain. And so I think that the bill has a nice kind of focus on ethics and responsibility in a way that is also compatible with kind of ex post regulation in a way that I think is very translatable across regulatory ecosystems. So looking forward to see how it pans out.
Yeah, I think it's really important that the US and Taiwan consider that eventually someone is going to start writing rules describing the risks of using AI, developing principles and how to implement it and how people want to engage with it, and implementing policies, testing different ways of implementing them and seeing what the results are and adjusting. And of course, there will be many different players, especially as AI sovereignty movements grow. But a collaborative approach among countries with like-minded shared values has a lot of potential to shape AI in the very near term. And I think that Christy and Minion have brought up a really important point that Taiwan is really on the front lines of some of these challenges already that existed before AI, like disinformation online. But AI is just making them more effective and worse in some ways, but also is potentially going to help fight against them. And Taiwan has a lot of attention on these areas as participating. Like, as Christy mentions, there's already the US-Taiwan dialogues, like the EPPD, the Economic Prosperity Partnership Dialogue, which is on its sixth or seventh round already. So good forums to be discussing what Taiwan is doing and is it working and how can the US consider it as well. But also participating in more international groupings as well. I think the AI AGE group, Taiwan has a representative there. So there are some various ways that I think as Taiwan begins to figure out how to implement the law, that will be really important for the US to watch, since an administration is only 4 years long. And so there's always going to be new momentums and new fresh ideas coming into the US government for how to deal with AI challenges. Okay, I will move us along. And as for the audience, if you would like to ask a question, please pop them in the Q&A box, and we will be getting to those in just a couple minutes. As moderator, I have one more question for our panelists before we move on to Q&A. So as I mentioned earlier, talent is really in high demand for workers in AI-related jobs, but also it could potentially cause job losses across some roles and sectors. So as we think about the impact of AI on the workforce, how do we ensure that we have the AI professionals that we need, the engineers and the people who really understand AI and who are studying it, as well as protecting people in sectors that are more vulnerable to AI automation or reducing the workforce? How do we prepare as partners for this kind of structural change in the economy? Who would like to go first? Christy, would you perhaps like to start us off with a couple thoughts?
Yes, the workforce is not my not my area, but I would like to raise a few points. In Taiwan, I mean, because the adoption of AI to some degree have been in place for a long time. For example, Taiwan's manufacturing industry, and they adopt these robots and using all kinds of automation for more than 1 decade. So people are aware how this AI can help their work. And therefore, they are preparing for this for a long time. And as I mentioned, that we have a persistent labor shortage, and therefore AI is very much welcome. But we do see a widening gap in terms of income, as I mentioned, and also opportunity. And you can imagine that right now in Taiwan, all these most talented students, they all flood into semiconductor and AI related, and they have probably 4 times or 5 times salary compared with their classmates in different fields. And therefore, in Taiwan, we are actually facing this concentration in several areas. And also, brain drain is also another issue, also another challenge. And I think you know that Taiwan companies, ICT companies, and right now followed by large chip makers are right now investing abroad. TSMC alone in US is bringing about 2,000 engineers, well-trained engineers from Taiwan, building up their families there. So there is so-called this TSMC village in Arizona. And also TSMC, by building up its factory, its fabs in Japan, is already sending around 1,000 well-trained engineers in Japan. So this kind of brain drain, and also large company, multinational approaching well-trained Taiwanese engineers to work, and therefore we're facing a lot of brain drain issues, especially in this technology area. So this AI probably impact workforce is one issue, and also brain drain and concentration in certain field are another issues that Taiwan has to face. However, I don't think so far there will be effective solution to this, because as AI definitely is going to be, Taiwan definitely is going to benefit from this AI-centric boom for years to come. And therefore, we will see this trend will continue for years. And this comes up with another area of collaboration, which is Taiwan and other countries, including the US, Southeast Asian country, can jointly educate or train talents that can be they can work either in Taiwan, in the US, or in third countries. So this can be another area under this AI era that Taiwan can cooperate with other countries.
The brain drain is a really challenging problem. And I've read some analyses that say there's this new AI dimension to the Silicon Shield, because Taiwan really has the fabs that produce the most advanced chips that are needed for AI. It has the schools producing the engineers who make those chips, and then they're all working in Hsinchu and then posted overseas occasionally. But as there are more data centers being built abroad and more integration between the design and the manufacturing sides, like as those two sides of the supply chain begin to work together closer, there will be a greater demand for Taiwanese engineers to move abroad. I wonder if there will be more room for perhaps tempting international students to Taiwan, not a bad proposition to study on a subtropical island, to train engineers there. I think this is an area that could help strengthen that aspect of the Silicon Shield without totally draining Taiwan of its engineers. But the wage gap problem is a big challenge as well. Minyoung, did you want to discuss that as well?
Yeah. And then maybe I can add more thought on the discussion on the AI versus the Silicon Shield and the workforce. I think if we only discuss the manufacturing part, it's still kind of distant to say that AI would lead to the problem of the engineers losing job. It is not the case. It will be more like Christy has mentioned, that our manufacturing firms like TSMC and all the other chip manufacturers, they have already invested for a long time how to increase efficiencies using AI and integrate more AI system data, deep learning into the whole manufacturing process. And the problem would otherwise the problem would be more like there's a lacking of the workforce in these areas. And maybe the physical AI in the coming years could help solve this problem of lack of workforce on the chip manufacturing production lines, but it's still very uncertain at the moment. And in terms of the global AI talents or the global circulations, especially between Taiwan and US in these chip manufacturing engineers, I think it's always the good things that the moving into Arizona, expanding to Arizona, create a new opportunity for TSMC engineers to include more engineers with international backgrounds, and for the senior engineers to lead a team that is not only constituted of Taiwanese engineers, but like the engineers from India, from US, from Singapore, from Japan, and they could work together and then to increase the best of this manufacturing, advanced manufacturing. But still, I think for the US was still one concerns that we have to notice about is like how to maintain the expansion of the advanced AI chip, yes, advanced chip manufacturing, but at the same time, it would not undermine the efficiency of Taiwan as the frontier of technological development. So they would still always need the circulations of chip engineers. Maybe they work several years in the US and they'll be back in Taiwan, or there will be more international students study in Taiwan and work in Taiwan's manufacturing industries and could contribute to the frontiers chip manufacturing innovations here in Taiwan. And this innovation, this momentum would eventually benefit the US, the manufacturing base in Arizona, and will be the win-win scenario for US and Taiwan instead of repressed by the China's by China's uh, industrial policies or their ambitious goal of repressing the whole global manufacturing supply chain.
Thank you. And actually, this makes me think of a question for Julia on the responsible AI side. So we've been talking a lot about like engineers and the impact on tech sectors, as well as sectors that apply AI. But there's also there are a ton of people working on AI governance, responsible AI. From your experience in that field, who are the major players? Are they coming from like NGO spaces, from government? And do you see them as being, I guess, formed within separate individual countries, or they're more international cooperative efforts going on?
Go off beat. That's a great question. I think so. A lot of like the broad norms around what responsible AI means and what we should do about AI ethics, AI safety, a lot of that is rooted in statements that have been coming out for years now from multilateral organizations. So the OECD was very early in issuing a set of kind of responsible AI principles. The same with UNESCO, has been active in the space for a while. Obviously, the UN is increasingly engaging in this space. And so I think that there's a general consensus based on what multilaterals have put out and what correspondingly industry actors, governments have put out that have all kind of coalesced around some general principles for responsible AI in terms of normatively what we should be going for. These are things like transparency, accountability, explainability, security, CBRN risk, which refers to chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear risk. So making sure AI doesn't increase those problems. Things like monitoring AI's use for autonomous weapons and ensuring that there's a human in the loop. So there there are a number of issues that I think are like broad consensus points for international perspectives on what to do about AI, responsible AI. So the major players in the space, I would say, are multilaterals. They're also the hyperscalers. Microsoft has a very active work stream on responsible AI. Google, Anthropic now, OpenAI, all of these companies are talking about responsible AI and what that means. When it comes to actually implementing that and the governance piece, that's where you have a lot more doubt and a lot more questions. So the EU put out their AI Act a couple of years ago, and that was the first comprehensive approach to regulating AI and binding approach to regulating AI, binding on the AI companies. I think that a lot of people at the time speculated that Europe was kind of pushing for a repeat of the Brussels effect with that, with the idea that that would inspire a lot of other approaches to AI policy around the world. Obviously, we are seeing echoes of it in Taiwan's new bill, but there is still a lot of debate around the extent to which laws should be binding on AI makers, AI companies, for the sake of facilitating innovation and not limiting innovation, kind of the balance of regulation and innovation and the format of achieving the normative AI goals that people generally agree on. That's where you see a lot of disagreement and a lot of questions. So there are, I think, a lot of different leaders in the space that all have very different perspectives on how to get us from A to B. And I know that may not be the most like satisfying answer to your question, but I think that's how I would view the space as it stands.
Oh, I think that's a wonderful answer to the question, because that's such an important part of actually using AI, is figuring out how to use it. And so it is really, I think it makes sense to hear that the big tech companies are, of course, really working in this space because they have a great interest in how this turns out. But there are so many other stakeholders as well. And I thought I would weave in a question we have from the audience, from Yuchang, asking about an exclusionary tech blockade aimed at containing China. So obviously, when we talk about an AI race, this is really what the conversation is about in the United States. It's a race between like the US and its partners versus China. And we're not really sure what the finish line is. It depends on how you define the race. Like, is it creating the most powerful AI? Is it figuring out the best uses for AI or the most productive uses for AI? But there is certainly an effort to implement more export controls over advanced chips or the supplies needed to create those chips. And China, in response, is, of course, working on developing its own AI-capable chips. So I thought I would ask the audience or ask our panelists your thoughts on what the impact of these like two separate spheres of AI development could have on the near future of AI, since we are essentially looking at like a US and Taiwan, and really the countries under the Pax Silica agreement that was signed in the US a couple months ago. And then China also working on developing its own AI models. What are your thoughts on that? Who would like to start? Minyan, would you like to offer some initial thought on that?
Yeah, I think it is definite to see that Taiwan will continue to work with US, not only for the security concern or the national security purpose or national interest purpose, but also for the industrial interest. It is very natural for Taiwanese supply chain, especially the semiconductor company, to work with US companies. But I think, as I said, we all know, like, if we talk about China's self-owned AI ecosystems, and the questions like what would be like, or what would be the new issues from these two competitions. I think we still have to admit reality that I don't think there is a very clear new Cold War framework emerging now. Instead, The current supply chain, especially AI supply chain, is still highly intertwined with Chinese markets or the Chinese local supply chain in every single field. Like just give some example. In the hardware field, even though we all know that TSMC is leading and almost producing 100% of AI advanced chip now serving for the big AI company in the US. But when these AI software companies, when they want to develop the new frontier technology, for example, like advanced packages, we would also notice some worrying issues like when the company have to purchase some materials like PCB, and the PCB panel would be mainly produced in China, and because most of the suppliers previously they have been moved to China and seeking the lower production cost there, and without without a policy efforts, they may not be incentivized to move back or move to the other area that is not like controlled by Chinese communist parties. So, and also like even though it's not that directly related to AI, but you could still see that in the current some disputes between US and some other like-minded countries in terms of trade issues or the other like tariff issues. We could also see some countries like Canada or some European country, they are seeking some new business opportunities or some investment opportunities from China, like EV industries. But we are not sure whether will still happen in the future, like in the AI industries. So China is still the options, and it's not 100% ruled out by the current like-minded democracies. And we have to prevent this from happening, or we have to prevent this from happening to the extent that we cannot bear the risk. So I think it's still very important that US keep leading like the multilateral or minilateral coalitions like the Pax Silicas. And also it was still very important like US policymaker or the policymaker circle to build up more discussions like how the US can cooperate with Taiwan and all the other like countries, and to see how to build a more efficient ecosystem for AI software, for AI hardware, for AI applications. And China could be ruled out not only for security concern, but also for industrial interest concern. Yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Christy, since you've studied AI integration, particularly in ASEAN, which, as we've noted, that is a big market for Taiwan's high-tech exports. What are your thoughts on that competition between Taiwan, the US, and China?
Yes, I think this is, I'd rather respond to this question in a broader aspects, not only for tech blockade, but also for strategic competition in other area, including critical minerals and other things, right? Because these are right now what US is facing increasing challenges from China, and China has being blockaded or being denied access to all this equipments, advanced technology, have been working a lot to develop their own system, including their own DeepSeek system, their own AI system. So I think it's a fact that there will not be one integrated system in the world. There'll definitely be two separate system. That's why we call two system, one world, two system. One is led by US, Euro, or Japan, and the other is definitely led by China. And for most countries, including Southeast Asian countries and Taiwan, and this they try, for example, the business sectors in Taiwan, they try to they don't want to be excluded from any of this system. For example, while Taiwan has recently more business time, more investment towards the US, but we cannot deny there are a lot of investment existing there for more than 1 decade in China, integrated into their own system and their market. And therefore, and also China accounts as the second largest market for Taiwan. And therefore, for non-sensitive, non-critical sectors of the supply chain, we don't see this significant decoupling. For example, Vietnam is serving Chinese market and also serving US market. Vietnam is buying components from China for assembling to final products towards the US. And therefore, for all these countries, they try to integrate us in between these two systems. So I think these are actually potential area that Taiwan, US can work together. And you mentioned about Southeast Asian country, and Vietnam a month ago just passed its own AI law, which is the first comprehensive AI law among Southeast Asian countries. Again, it's using the EU model. So I would say that all Southeast Asian countries, except for some they are closer to China, are part of the US or part of the this supply chain partners towards with US and also with Taiwan. So this again can provide to be another area where the supply chain partnership will be built, and also more exchange Southeast Asian countries newly adopted AI model or AI regulation. Taiwan, US can try to discuss with them and trying to make the models they are using or the regulation they are using will be somehow responding to US concern or Taiwan's legal framework so that there can be more room for cooperation.
Thank you so much. And Julia, I will give you the last word. What thoughts should we leave with as we continue to think about US and Taiwan collaboration on AI issues? Like what is your hope that the partnership will prioritize in terms of responsible AI?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it quick. But I think that generally, we have a set of normative values that are largely agreed upon, though they may vary in terms of how different parties prioritize them. What I'd love to see from Taiwan and the US, I think with Taiwan having such an edge in hardware and the US having an edge in software, there's a real potential to set meaningful policy precedents for how to achieve normative goals in AI and how to think about what are the policy mechanisms that work and what makes sense for industry and for society. And so I'm hopeful that together, the combined kind of economic and innovative power that the US and Taiwan wield can really lead to some effective, pragmatic policy steps that build on the bill that just came out of Taiwan and on the work that's coming out of the US, and try to find a way to synthesize AI policy that works for everybody and has real impact.
Thank you very much. And so, yes, we are a bit over time, but thank you so much, Christy, for staying up late, and for Minyan and Julia joining from the East Coast as well. This was a really informative and thoughtful discussion. We covered so many areas. And yes, as the US and Taiwan deepen work together on AI, there are a lot of ways that the governments, industries, NGOs, people can collaborate, and not just between the two, but with multilateral organizations. And as leaders in the field, Washington and Taipei do have a need to build that responsible partnership from the beginning. So thank you so much to our audience for joining us today. And for more of Stimson's work on AI, please continue to check our website. And this will conclude the